I'm Rosa Donovan, 34 years old, and I thought I had the perfect marriage. My husband James and I were at the airport ready to board our flight to Paris for our anniversary, when he suddenly clutched his stomach. "I don't feel well," he whispered, his face turning pale as he rushed to the bathroom. Worried, I sought help, but what happened next shattered my world. A security officer approached, her expression grave. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be with him. Your husband has been living a double life." My heart stopped. If you're watching this video right now, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Take a second to hit that like button and subscribe before I tell you what that security officer revealed about the man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. Life with James Montgomery seemed picture-perfect from the outside. As a graphic designer working remotely, I had built a successful business creating logos and websites for clients across the country. I could work from our beautiful suburban home while maintaining the flexibility to be available whenever James was home from his frequent business trips. We met 6 years ago at my college friend Natalie's wedding. James was the best man, standing tall in his tailored suit with a smile that lit up the room. When our eyes met across the dance floor, something just clicked. He approached me with a glass of champagne and a confident introduction. "I've been watching you all evening," he said. "You're the only person here who looks like they're having as much fun as I am." His charm was magnetic. James worked as a finance executive for a consulting firm, a job that impressed my parents when I introduced him at our family dinner 3 weeks later. We dated for 8 blissful months before he proposed during a surprise weekend getaway to the mountains. The proposal was everything I had dreamed of: sunset champagne and a beautiful speech about wanting to spend his life with me. "Rosa, you're the missing piece I've been searching for," he said as he slipped the diamond ring onto my finger. "I can't imagine my life without you." Our wedding was intimate but elegant, with only close friends and family at a vineyard overlooking rolling hills. The first years of marriage were everything I had hoped for. We bought our dream house in a quiet suburb with a home office for my design work and plenty of space for the family we planned to have someday. James traveled frequently for work, consulting trips to Chicago, New York, Seattle, and dozens of other cities. I never questioned these trips. His career was demanding but rewarding. When he was home, he was attentive and loving. He'd bring me souvenirs from his travels and tell me entertaining stories about difficult clients and crazy travel mishaps. My design business grew steadily, and I enjoyed the independence it gave me. I could focus on my creative work when James was traveling and spend quality time with him when he was home. It seemed like the perfect balance. But over the past year, something had shifted. James became more distant, often distracted when we were together. He started taking phone calls in another room, his voice lowered to a whisper. When I asked about these changes, he blamed increased pressure at work. "The company's expanding, Rosa. They're considering me for a promotion to regional director," he explained one night after missing dinner again. "I just need to get through this busy period and things will calm down." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He had never given me reason to doubt his word before. When our 5th anniversary approached, I suggested we take a special trip to reconnect. "Let's go to Paris," I said one evening as we sat on the couch, physically close but emotionally distant. "We've always talked about going. This could be the perfect time." James seemed hesitant at first, but eventually warmed to the idea. "You're right. We need this," he agreed, putting his arm around me. "I'll make arrangements for time off." I spent weeks planning our perfect romantic getaway, researching the most charming cafes, booking a boutique hotel near the Seine, creating an itinerary that balanced tourist attractions with authentic local experiences. James seemed genuinely excited as the trip approached, helping me practice basic French phrases in the evenings. The morning of our flight, James received a work call just as we were leaving for the airport. I carried our luggage to the car while he paced in the living room, speaking in hushed tones. "I told you that's not going to work for me anymore," I overheard him say. "No, absolutely not. I've made other arrangements. Yes, I understand the implications." When he joined me in the car, I asked about the call. His explanation about a project handover seemed reasonable, but something in his tone felt off. I dismissed the feeling as pre-travel anxiety and focused on the excitement of our trip. At the airport, James seemed increasingly nervous. He checked his phone constantly and appeared distracted during the check-in process. Going through security, he fumbled with his belongings and almost forgot to remove his laptop from his bag. "Are you okay?" I asked as we collected our things. "Just tired," he replied with a tight smile. "And thinking about all the emails I'll have waiting when we get back." We found seats at our gate, and I pulled out the Paris guidebook I'd been studying. James excused himself to buy coffee and returned looking pale. "I don't feel so great," he said, sitting heavily beside me. "Must be something I ate this morning." I had no idea that this small complaint was the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about my marriage and the man I had built my life around. James sat hunched in the airport chair, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. His breathing had become shallow, and he kept checking his watch and scanning the terminal. "Maybe we should find a pharmacy," I suggested, growing increasingly worried. "You look terrible." "It's probably just anxiety," James replied, but his voice was strained. "I always get a bit nervous before flights." This was news to me. We had taken several trips during our marriage, and he had never mentioned flight anxiety before. Before I could question this, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. James stared at the screen, his face draining of color. "I need to use the restroom," he said abruptly, standing up. In his haste, he dropped his phone on the seat. "Watch my stuff. I'll be right back." As James rushed away, his phone lit up with a series of text notifications. The preview bubbles flashed briefly on the screen. "Can't wait to see you in Paris." "Did you tell her yet?" "Flight on time." I stared at the messages, my stomach tightening. Who was texting my husband about Paris? Who was he supposed to tell what I reached for the phone, then stopped myself? Throughout our marriage, we had respected each other's privacy. We knew each other's passwords, but rarely checked each other's devices. But those messages? Before I could decide whether to check his phone, James returned, looking even worse than before. "Rosa, I'm really not feeling well," he said quickly, pocketing his phone. "Would you mind getting me some water and maybe something bland to eat? I'm going to sit here and try to pull myself together before boarding." Concerned for my husband, I nodded and headed toward the airport food court. As I walked away, I glanced back to see James hunched over his phone, typing rapidly. I was selecting a plain bagel at a cafe when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned to find a woman in an airport security uniform, her expression serious. "Mrs. Donovan?" she asked quietly. "Yes, that's me," I replied, surprised she knew my name. "I'm Officer Lisa Taylor with Airport Security. Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Her tone was professional but urgent. "Is something wrong with our luggage?" I asked, immediately concerned. "No, ma'am. It's about your husband." She guided me to a quiet corner away from the flow of travelers. "Mrs. Donovan, I recognize this is unusual, but I need to ask you some questions about the man you're traveling with today." I felt defensive immediately. "My husband, what about him?" Officer Taylor's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, I believe you may be in danger. The man you're with has been flagged in our system. He's been living under multiple identities." I nearly laughed. "There must be some mistake. I've been married to James Montgomery for 5 years. He's a finance executive. I know him better than anyone." "I wish I was mistaken," she said, pulling out her phone and showing me a photograph. "This was taken 3 months ago at Chicago O'Hare Airport. The man with you today was traveling under the name Robert Jenkins with another woman he introduced as his wife." I stared at the photo, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It was undeniably James' arm wrapped around a blonde woman I had never seen before, both of them smiling at the security camera. This is impossible, I whispered. Mrs. Donovan, we've been tracking his movements for some time as part of a larger investigation. He's been using at least 3 different identities that we know of. I looked back toward our gate and saw James watching us, his expression changing from confusion to alarm as he realized I was speaking with security. He stood up, grabbing our carry-on bags. I need to get back to him, I said, my voice shaking. Please be careful, Officer Taylor warned. If you confront him, he may become unpredictable. We have officers nearby if you need assistance. I walked back to James in a daze, my mind racing. When he saw my face, he must have realized something was wrong. What did that security officer want? He demanded, his previous illness seemingly forgotten. She was asking about unattended baggage. I lied, watching his face carefully. James, who is Robert Jenkins? His expression flickered between surprise, fear, and calculation before settling into wounded innocence. What are you talking about? And who's the blonde woman you were with in Chicago 3 months ago when you told me you were at a financial conference in Denver? James stepped closer, lowering his voice. Rosa, you're making a scene. That officer has clearly confused me with someone else. She had photos, James. It was you. His eyes darted around the terminal, assessing escape routes. This is ridiculous. I'm calling our lawyer. As he reached for his phone, I grabbed his wrist. Who were those text messages from the ones about Paris, about whether you'd told me something yet? James's face hardened, all pretense of illness gone. You're reading my private messages now. What happened to trust? Trust. I laughed bitterly. That's rich coming from a man traveling under multiple names. I noticed Officer Taylor speaking into her radio, and 2 more security officers began moving in our direction. James saw them too. Rosa, we need to go, now. I can explain everything, but not here. As he grabbed my arm, I jerked away. Don't touch me. The security officers surrounded us, creating a buffer from curious onlookers. Sir, ma'am, would you please come with us? One of them requested firmly. James tried once more. Rosa, don't do this. 5 years together and you're going to believe some security guard over me. I looked into the eyes of the man I thought I knew and saw a stranger looking back. I don't know who you are anymore, I whispered as the officers escorted us away from the gate, our anniversary trip to Paris forgotten in the shock of betrayal. The private room in the airport security area was sparse, just a table, 4 chairs, and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows. Officer Taylor sat across from me while James was taken to a separate room for questioning. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. Mrs. Donovan, I understand this is extremely difficult. Officer Taylor began, her voice gentle. But we need to share some information with you about the man you know as James Montgomery. She opened a folder and spread several documents on the table. We've been tracking this individual for months as part of a multi-agency investigation into identity fraud and financial schemes. The first document showed driver's licenses with James's photo, but different names: James Montgomery, Robert Jenkins, and David Wilson. These are all active identities he maintains, she explained, each with separate credit cards, bank accounts, and residences. I stared at the licenses, unable to reconcile them with the man who had held me every night for 5 years. That's not possible, I whispered. We share bank accounts. I would have noticed large sums of money missing. The accounts you share are legitimate, Officer Taylor confirmed. But they're only a small part of his financial picture. Your husband maintains separate financial lives in Chicago, Seattle, and Boston. She slid another document forward. Flight records showing James's travel patterns. The business trips I'd never questioned now revealed a disturbing pattern. Every month, he spent approximately 1 week in each city. In Chicago, he's Robert Jenkins, married to Melissa Jenkins for 3 years. In Seattle, he's David Wilson, engaged to Tanya Rodriguez. My mind flashed to all the times James had brought me souvenirs from his business trips, a coffee mug from Chicago, a handmade scarf from Seattle. Were these gifts actually purchased by a husband for his other wives? What about Boston? I asked numbly. Officer Taylor hesitated. In Boston, he visits his parents and maintains his original identity. From what we can gather, James Montgomery is his birth name. At least one truth in a sea of lies. How? I struggled to form the question. How could he maintain this for years? Wouldn't someone notice? Con artists like this are extremely skilled at compartmentalizing their lives, she explained. They choose victims in different cities, create plausible cover stories about jobs requiring travel, and manipulate their targets into accepting long absences as normal. I'm not a victim, I protested automatically, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The door opened, and another officer entered with more files. We've made contact with Chicago PD. They've had complaints about investment fraud under the Jenkins identity. My head snapped up. Investment fraud? Officer Taylor nodded grimly. He appears to run the same scheme in each location. He builds trust, establishes a legitimate-seeming life, then convinces friends and family to invest in non-existent business opportunities. The room seemed to spin around me as memories flooded back. 6 months ago, James had mentioned an exclusive investment opportunity through his firm. Several of our friends had invested substantial amounts based on his recommendation. Just last month, he'd told me the first returns would be coming soon. Oh, God, I whispered. Our friends. He took their money. The evidence continued to mount as Officer Taylor produced credit card statements showing purchases I'd never known about. Jewelry, luxury hotels, restaurants. There were charges from Paris dating back months, planning for a trip that clearly wasn't meant for me. The Paris reservation at Le Marais Hotel is under the name Jenkins, Officer Taylor confirmed. For Robert and Melissa. I remembered James's reluctance when I first suggested Paris, followed by his sudden enthusiasm. He hadn't been planning our romantic anniversary trip. He'd already booked one with another wife. A wave of nausea hit me, and I barely made it to the trash can in the corner before emptying my stomach. Officer Taylor handed me a bottle of water and waited patiently while I collected myself. When the door opened again, James was escorted in by 2 officers. He looked nothing like the confident man I'd married. His shoulders were slumped, his expression calculating as he assessed the documents spread across the table. Rosa, he began, his voice taking on the soothing tone he used when trying to calm me after an argument. This is all a misunderstanding that I can explain. Save it. I cut him off, surprising myself with the ice in my voice. I've seen the evidence. Chicago, Seattle, Boston. Robert David James? How many wives do you actually have? His expression shifted, and for a moment I glimpsed something cold and alien behind his eyes. Technically, only you're legally my wife, he said, as if that made everything better. The others are relationships that got complicated. Complicated? I echoed in disbelief. You're living 3 separate lives. 4, Officer Taylor corrected quietly. We've just confirmed another identity in Atlanta. James shot her a venomous look before turning his attention back to me. Rosa, baby, listen to me. Yes, I made some mistakes. I got in over my head with some business deals and had to create some alternative arrangements to fix things. But what we have is real. I thought about the wedding ring he claimed to have lost swimming last year, likely given to another woman. The unexplained receipts I'd found in his jacket, purchases for other homes, other wives. The inconsistent stories about which clients he was meeting, because there were no clients, only other families. Did you ever love me? I asked, hating the vulnerability in my question. Something like regret flashed across his face. Of course I did. You're different from the others. That's what you tell all of them, isn't it? His silence was answer enough. Officer Taylor explained that James was being detained on multiple charges, including identity fraud and financial crimes. They were working with police departments in other cities to build a comprehensive case. "Do you want to press charges as well, Mrs. Donovan?" she asked. Did I? This man had stolen 5 years of my life, built a marriage on lies, and potentially ruined our friends financially. But pressing charges meant a public record, meant everyone would know how completely I'd been fooled. "Yes," I finally said. "I want to press charges." As James was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. "Rosa, don't do this. We can still fix this." The man I thought I'd spend my life with was a stranger, a shell containing nothing but lies and calculation. I turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. Officer Taylor provided me with contact information for victim services and a detective who would follow up about the case. She explained that my trip to Paris was obviously canceled and offered to help me arrange transportation home. I nodded numbly, unable to process that just hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether I'd packed enough adapters for our romantic getaway. Now I was sitting in an airport security office, my entire reality shattered beyond recognition. "What happens now?" I asked, not sure if I was asking about the legal process or my own life. "Now," Officer Taylor said gently, "you start putting the pieces back together, but not alone. There are resources and people who can help." I gathered my belongings, my husband's carry-on bag, now evidence in an investigation. Walking through the terminal alone, I passed happy couples, families, business travelers, all with destinations and certainties I no longer possessed. My destination had vanished. My certainty had been an illusion. All I had left was the long drive back to a house filled with photographs of a marriage that had never truly existed. The drive home from the airport felt surreal. Every song on the radio seemed to mock me with lyrics about love and trust. I eventually turned it off, preferring the silence that matched the emptiness growing inside me. Our house, my house now, looked exactly as we'd left it that morning. James's coffee mug still sat in the sink. His running shoes remained by the door. The Paris guidebooks I'd been studying for weeks lay on the coffee table, sticky notes marking all the romantic spots I'd planned to visit with my loving husband. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, seeing evidence of James everywhere, but feeling like I'd never really known him at all. In the bedroom, I stared at our wedding photo on the nightstand, his arms around me, both of us beaming at the camera. Had he been calculating even then? Planning his next identity, his next wife? I couldn't bear to sleep in our bed. Instead, I curled up on the living room couch, wrapped in a blanket, and called my best friend, Amelia. "Rosa, aren't you supposed to be on a plane right now?" she answered cheerfully. "Amelia," I said, my voice breaking. "Everything's gone wrong. James, he's not who we thought he was." Within an hour, Amelia arrived at my door with what she called her emergency survival kit, wine chocolate tissues, and her overnight bag. "Start from the beginning," she said after settling me on the couch. I recounted the day's events in a detached voice, as if telling a story about someone else's life. Amelia listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to fury. "That absolute monster," she finally said when I finished. "I never trusted his perfect act. You didn't—" This was news to me. Amelia hesitated. "There were moments, little inconsistencies in his stories, but he was so charming, and you seemed so happy. I thought I was just being cynical." The next morning, a detective from the local police department arrived to take my full statement. Detective Rodriguez explained that they were coordinating with agencies in multiple states to build a comprehensive case. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Donovan, your husband appears to be quite experienced at this type of fraud. We've identified at least 3 other women in similar situations, plus numerous financial victims." "Other women currently?" I asked, needing to understand the full scope of his deception. 2 current concurrent relationships that we've confirmed, possibly more we haven't identified yet. and there appeared to be previous relationships that followed the same pattern. My lawyer, Patricia Harris, arrived shortly after the detective left. Amelia had contacted her on my behalf, knowing I was too overwhelmed to think clearly. "The good news, if we can call it that," Patricia explained after reviewing the situation, "is that your marriage is legally valid, which gives you certain protections. The bad news is untangling your finances from his fraudulent activities will be complicated." She outlined the steps we needed to take: freezing joint accounts, documenting assets, filing for divorce, and potentially bankruptcy protection if James's schemes implicated me in any legal liabilities. "What about our friends who invested with him?" I asked, thinking of the dinner parties where James had charmed our social circle with promises of exclusive investment opportunities. "They'll need to file their own police reports," Patricia said, "but having your testimony will help their cases." After she left, I found myself standing in front of the bedroom closet staring at James's neatly hung suits and color-coordinated ties. The organizational system I had once found endearing now seemed sinister. Another tool in his compartmentalized life. As I began removing his clothes, a small velvet box fell from the pocket of his winter coat. Inside was a silver necklace with a delicate sapphire pendant. Not my birthstone, but perhaps belonging to Melissa or Tanya or whoever waited for him in Atlanta. The discovery triggered my first true emotional breakdown. I sank to the floor, clutching the necklace intended for another woman, and finally let the tears come. Great heaving sobs that felt ripped from the core of my being. Amelia found me there an hour later, surrounded by James's belongings. "I found evidence," I said, holding up the necklace. "More lies." The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and sleepless nights. James's parents flew in from Boston, horrified by their son's actions. They were kind, bewildered people who kept apologizing as if they could somehow make up for their son's betrayal. "We never imagined he could do something like this," his mother said tearfully over coffee at my kitchen table. "The James we raised wasn't this person." I almost envied them their shock. At least they had genuine memories with the real James. Everything I had was built on calculated deception. The story broke in local news after one of James's investment victims went public. My phone began ringing with calls from friends, acquaintances, and eventually reporters seeking comments. I stopped answering unknown numbers and requested medical leave from work, unable to focus on design projects when my life had become unrecognizable. Dr. Sharon Walters, the therapist recommended by Victim Services, became my lifeline. Twice weekly, I sat in her calm office trying to make sense of the past 5 years. "What you're experiencing is similar to post-traumatic stress," she explained during one session. "Your brain is trying to reconcile the person you thought you knew with the reality you've discovered." "I keep going over every conversation, every trip, every gift," I admitted, trying to separate truth from lies. "That's natural," Dr. Walters assured me. "But at some point, you'll need to accept that you may never know where all the lines were drawn." The night terrors began about a month after James's arrest. I would wake up gasping, convinced someone was in the house watching me. Sometimes in the dreams, James would be standing at the foot of the bed, his face shifting between different identities. The trust issues spilled over into every interaction. When the plumber came to fix a leak, I found myself questioning whether his credentials were real. When a friend offered financial help, I wondered if there was an ulterior motive. Well-meaning comments from acquaintances cut deeper than they knew. "I always thought you two were the perfect couple," a neighbor remarked while bringing over a casserole. "How could you not know?" asked another friend, quickly adding, "I don't mean it like that, but 5 years? I lost 15 pounds in the first 6 weeks, unable to stomach more than a few bites at each meal." My clothes hung loosely, and dark circles formed permanent shadows under my eyes. Each day became an exercise in simply getting through the hours, putting one foot in front of the other. Then came the email from Sarah Jenkins, the legal wife of Robert Jenkins James's Chicago identity. I don't know if the authorities have connected us yet, she wrote, but I saw the news story about James Montgomery. I recognized him immediately as my husband Robert. I think we should talk. Sarah's email led to a conference call with her and Tanya from Seattle. The three of us shared our stories, each filling in pieces of the elaborate deception James had constructed. He told me he was an investment banker, Sarah said, always traveling to New York and Boston. International sales director for me, Tanya added, with clients in Asia and Europe. We discovered he had proposed to each of us in nearly identical scenarios. Weekend trips, sunset settings, the same speech about having found his missing piece. He kept a notebook, I told them, coded entries about each of us likes and dislikes important dates. I found it after the arrest and gave it to the detectives. So we were just projects to him, Tanya asked, her voice breaking. Data points to be managed. None of us had a comforting answer, but from that painful conversation grew an unexpected support system. We created a private online group, eventually including 2 other women from James's past and several financial victims. We shared resources, legal updates, and most importantly, validation that none of us were to blame for believing a skilled manipulator. 2 months after the airport incident, I faced James for the first time at his preliminary hearing. I spent the morning in the bathroom alternating between panic attacks and attempts to make myself presentable. The face in the mirror looked years older than it had on that morning when we left for the airport, excited for our anniversary trip. Walking into the courtroom, I felt a strange calm descend. James sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual tailored suit. He looked smaller somehow, less substantial, without the props of his performed identity. When he turned and saw me, his eyes lit up with recognition. He tried to communicate something, remorse perhaps, or more likely calculation. I stared back blankly, feeling nothing but a distant pity for the empty shell of a man who had once been the center of my world. His attorney had negotiated a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial. James pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and identity theft, though charges were still pending in other states. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison with possibility of parole after 5+ restitution to his financial victims. As they led him away, James looked back at me one last time. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, not giving him the satisfaction of a final emotional connection. Returning to the house alone, I felt a shift in my perspective. This place that had felt like a mausoleum of my failed marriage now seemed like just a house, one filled with objects and memories I could choose to keep or discard. That freedom was short-lived. The following day, while sorting through James's remaining belongings in the home office, I discovered a tiny camera hidden in a bookshelf positioned to view our entire bedroom. My skin crawled as I realized the implications. Had he been recording our most intimate moments, sharing them with others, using them as blackmail against previous victims? The discovery led to a full sweep of the house by police technicians who found 2 additional cameras and evidence that the footage had been remotely accessible. Detective Rodriguez explained that this pattern of surveillance was consistent with James's need for control and information management. The invasion of privacy broke through the emotional numbness I had been cultivating. For the first time since the airport, I felt pure, unfiltered rage. I gathered every photograph of James in the house and burned them in a metal trash can in the backyard, watching his smiling face curl and blacken in the flames. The diamond engagement ring that had once seemed like a symbol of perfect love now represented nothing but lies. I sold it to a pawn shop and used the money to fund additional therapy sessions. 6 weeks after the discovery of the cameras, I forced myself to attend a colleague's birthday dinner, my first social event since everything fell apart. The questions came as expected. How are you holding up? Have you heard from him? Were there any warning signs? I answered as briefly as possible, redirecting conversations towards safer topics. But the experience, while uncomfortable, proved I could still function in the world. The house that had once been our dream home now felt contaminated by deception. Every room held memories I couldn't trust. With my lawyer's encouragement, I put it on the market and began searching for a small apartment across town, somewhere with no connections to James. A fresh start isn't running away, Dr. Walters assured me during a session where I questioned this decision. It's giving yourself permission to build something new on solid ground. The support group Sarah, Tanya, and I had formed expanded to include other victims of relationship fraud. Together, we created resources for people emerging from similar situations. Checklists for financial protection, emotional recovery guides, warning signs to recognize in future relationships. I started a private blog documenting my recovery journey initially just for myself, but eventually sharing it with the group. The writing became therapeutic, allowing me to process my experiences while potentially helping others. On my last night in the house before the new owners took possession, I walked through each room, acknowledging the pain, but also recognizing my survival. He took 5 years, I said aloud to the empty space. But he doesn't get to take my future too. 6 months after the airport revelation, I woke up in my new apartment feeling something I hadn't experienced in a long time. A sense of possibility. The space was small, but entirely mine, decorated with artwork and furniture I had chosen without input from the man who had shaped so much of my previous life. My design business had suffered during the months of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil, but clients were gradually returning. I had created a home office in the second bedroom, a creative space untainted by James's presence. That afternoon, I had a breakthrough session with Dr. Walters. "I've been thinking about something," I told her. "All this time, I've been blaming myself for not seeing the signs for being so easily fooled, but that's exactly what he wanted me to focus on." Dr. Walters nodded encouragingly. "Go on." "If I'm busy questioning everything about myself, my judgment, my intelligence, my worth, then I'm still letting him control the narrative. I'm still playing a role in his story rather than creating my own." "That's an important insight, Rosa. What do you want your story to be now?" The question lingered with me as I drove to my parents' house that weekend. I had avoided visiting them in the immediate aftermath of James's arrest, unable to face their concern and inevitable questions. But they had been patient, giving me space, while making it clear they were there when I needed them. My father embraced me tightly when I arrived, while my mother busied herself in the kitchen preparing all my childhood favorites. "We never liked him," my father admitted over dinner. "Something about him seemed too rehearsed." "Dad," my mother chided, "that's not helpful now." "It's okay," I assured her. "I need to hear this. Why didn't you say anything?" They exchanged glances. "You were so happy," my mother said softly. "And he was very convincing. We thought maybe we were being overprotective." "Besides," my father added, "would you have listened?" The honest answer was no. I had been completely entranced by James's performance of the perfect husband. Any criticism would have seemed like jealousy or misunderstanding. That weekend at my childhood home began a healing process with my family that I hadn't realized I needed. Looking through old photo albums, reconnecting with the person I had been before James entered my life, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been suppressed during my marriage. I had once loved painting watercolors, but set it aside when James commented that it took too much time away from us. I had been an avid hiker before meeting him, but our weekends gradually filled with his preferred social events instead of outdoor adventures. Back in my apartment, I bought new watercolors and signed up for a weekend hiking group. Small steps toward reclaiming forgotten joys. The divorce proceedings dragged on despite James's incarceration. His assets were frozen, and untangling the legitimate finances from his fraudulent schemes required forensic accountants and endless documentation. Patricia, my lawyer, guided me through the complex legal landscape. "The good news is the judge has been very sympathetic to your situation," she explained during a progress update. "The bad news is that many of the assets James claimed to have may not actually exist. I had made peace with the financial setback. Money could be replaced. Time and trust were the more precious commodities he had stolen. A more immediate concern arose when I missed my period 2 months after James's arrest. The stress had disrupted my cycle before, but the possibility of carrying his child sent me into a panic spiral. The relief I felt when the pregnancy test came back negative confirmed what I already knew. Any connection to James needed to be severed completely for me to heal. Through my victim advocate, I arranged a meeting with James's court-appointed therapist, Dr. Malcolm Green. I didn't want to see James himself, but needed to understand how someone could live such an elaborately compartmentalized life. Without violating confidentiality, Dr. Green explained in his office, I can tell you that individuals who maintain multiple identities like this often display traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder and narcissism. You mean he's a sociopath? I asked. I can't diagnose someone in a discussion with a third party, he replied carefully. But generally speaking, people who engage in this level of deception often lack empathy while possessing an excessive need for admiration and control. Was anything real? The question that had haunted me for months. Dr. Green considered his response. People with these traits are capable of mimicking emotional connections very convincingly. They study others and become what their targets want to see. It doesn't mean every moment was calculated, but the relationship itself served a purpose in their overall objectives. I spent weeks researching psychological manipulation and identity fraud, trying to understand the mechanics of how someone could maintain such elaborate deceptions. I learned about gaslighting, love bombing, and the subtle ways manipulators isolate their victims from support networks. The knowledge didn't erase the pain, but provided a framework for understanding that what happened wasn't my fault. James had executed a carefully crafted long con targeting not just me, but multiple women with similar profiles, successful independent but wanting partnership. Slowly, life began to take on new rhythms. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage, some of whom admitted they had seen concerning behaviors in James, but hadn't known how to express their worries. My friend Daniel invited me to a dinner with colleagues from his architectural firm. The evening was pleasant, filled with conversation about designs and projects, with no mention of my personal drama. As Daniel walked me to my car afterward, he commented, "It's good to see you laugh again, Rosa." When he hugged me goodbye, I felt a momentary spark of interest, the first since everything fell apart. But when he suggested getting coffee the following week, panic surged through me. I made a hasty excuse and practically fled to my car. I had a panic attack because someone asked me for coffee, I told Dr. Walters at our next session. Not even romantically, just friendly coffee. Your trust has been profoundly violated, she reminded me. It's natural to be hypervigilant about new connections. But I don't want to be alone forever. You won't be, but healing can't be rushed. For now, focus on rebuilding trust with yourself first. That advice led me to adopt Luna, a 3-year-old shepherd mix, from the local shelter. Having another living being depend on me helped establish new routines. Our morning walks gave structure to my days, and her unconditional affection began to thaw the frozen places in my heart. Professional validation came in the form of a design award for a rebrand I had completed for a local nonprofit. The recognition reminded me that while my personal judgment had been catastrophically wrong about James, my professional instincts remained sound. As the 1-year mark of the airport incident approached, I found myself dreading the anniversary. Dr. Walters suggested creating an alternative ritual to reclaim the day. Instead of letting it be about what was lost, make it about what you've survived and what you're building. 1 year after my world imploded at the airport, I checked into a small cabin at a mountain retreat 2 hours from the city. I had chosen this place deliberately, somewhere James and I had never visited with no associations to my previous life. The cabin was rustic but comfortable with a stone fireplace and large windows overlooking pine forests. I had brought my watercolors journal and a bottle of expensive champagne, not to celebrate, but to acknowledge survival. That evening, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in dramatic oranges and purples, I opened my journal and began writing. A year ago today, I thought I knew what my life was. I thought I knew who I loved and who loved me. I was wrong about almost everything, and that knowledge nearly destroyed me. But I'm still here. I'm still breathing. And slowly, I'm finding the real Rosa who got lost somewhere along the way. The writing flowed easily, documenting the painful journey from devastation to tentative rebuilding. I acknowledged the anger, grief, and shame that had accompanied the discovery of James's deception, but also recognized the strength I had found in the aftermath. By the time I finished writing, stars had emerged in the clear mountain sky. I poured a glass of champagne and raised it in a silent toast, not to the past, but to the woman who had survived it. Back in the city, life continued its slow progression toward a new normal. An unexpected friendship had developed between me and Officer Lisa Taylor, the airport security officer who had first identified James. She occasionally checked in on my well-being, and we eventually began meeting for coffee. "I see this more often than you'd think," she told me during one of our meetings. "People living double lives, but your ex was operating at a different level. Multiple identities maintained over years." "Lucky me," I said dryly. "I married an overachiever." We shared a laugh, gallows humor that felt healing in its darkness. The final divorce decree arrived 14 months after the airport incident, officially ending my marriage to a man who had never truly existed. I signed the papers in Patricia's office, feeling a complex mix of relief and lingering grief. "It's officially over," I said, watching her assistant take the documents for filing. "Legally, yes," Patricia agreed. "Emotionally, these things take their own time." That same week, I received notification that James had been sentenced to additional time for charges in Washington state. The prosecutor sent a brief note thanking me for my testimony and evidence which had helped secure the conviction. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the prison where James was serving his initial sentence. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and nearly threw it away unopened, but something made me hesitate. "You don't have to read it," Dr. Walters said when I brought the unopened letter to our session. "What do you think you might gain or lose by reading his words?" I considered the question carefully. If I don't read it, I might always wonder what he said. If I do read it, he might manipulate me again somehow. "Would you like to read it here with support?" she offered. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded 3 pages of prison stationery. "Dear Rosa," it began, "I've had a lot of time to think about the pain I've caused you and others." The letter continued with eloquent expressions of remorse, explanations about his troubled childhood, and claims that of all his relationships what we had was most real. It concluded with a request for forgiveness and the possibility of maintaining some form of contact. When I finished reading, I looked up at Dr. Walters. "It's another performance," I said quietly. "He's using all the right words, hitting all the right emotional notes, but there's nothing behind it." She nodded. "What do you want to do with it?" "I want to respond," I said, surprising myself with the certainty. "Not for him, but for me. I want to say all the things I never got to say." Over the next week, I drafted and redrafted my response, working with Dr. Walters to ensure I was writing from a place of strength rather than lingering vulnerability. The final letter was clear and direct. "James, I've read your letter and recognize your attempt at manipulation. I am not interested in forgiveness, contact, or closure with you. My healing has happened without your participation. This will be my only communication. Do not contact me again." I sent the letter through official channels and felt a weight lift once it was out of my hands. The support group that had formed around James's victims had evolved into a more formal organization. Sarah Tanya and I worked with a nonprofit specializing in relationship fraud to develop educational materials and support resources. My design skills found purpose in creating accessible guides and visual materials for people emerging from similar situations. Speaking at a victim support conference marked a turning point in my recovery. Standing at the podium, sharing my experience with others who understood the unique pain of betrayal, I felt reconnected to a larger community. The most insidious part of this type of fraud, I told the audience, isn't the financial loss or even the broken trust. It's how it makes you question your own reality, your own judgment. Rebuilding that internal trust is the hardest part of recovery. The presentation led to requests for interviews and article contributions. I agreed to a few establishing firm boundaries around my privacy, while using my experience to help others recognize warning signs. My relationship with my brother Michael, which had been strained for years due to his dislike of James, began to heal. He visited my new apartment, bringing housewarming gifts and an apology. "I knew something was off about him," Michael admitted. "But instead of finding a way to talk to you about it, I just withdrew. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed support." "You're here now," I told him, accepting his outstretched hand. That's what matters. Healing rippled outward through my family as we addressed the disconnections that had occurred during my marriage. I realized how effectively James had isolated me, not through obvious control, but through subtle distancing. Weekend plans that always conflicted with family gatherings, gentle criticism of my parents' values, gradual reshaping of my social priorities. 18 months after the airport incident, I decided to finally take the trip to Paris that had been interrupted so dramatically. Booking the ticket felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. The thought of traveling alone still triggered anxiety, but Dr. Walters helped me develop coping strategies for panic attacks and hypervigilance. "You're not going back to that day," she reminded me. "You're creating a new experience, one that belongs entirely to you." The morning of my flight, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety as I entered the same airport where everything had fallen apart. But instead of James beside me, I had Luna's training certificate. She had become my emotional support animal, and a security contact provided by Officer Taylor. Walking through the terminal where James had clutched his stomach and claimed illness, I breathed deeply and reminded myself that I was no longer the same woman who had stood in this spot believing her husband's lies. As the plane took off carrying me toward a city I had once associated with romantic dreams and now viewed as a symbol of personal reclamation, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom. The past would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined the narrative. The truth that had once shattered my world had ultimately set me free. I hope my story helps someone who might be missing the red flags I ignored. If you've experienced relationship deception, or know someone who has, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might help others recognize warning signs before it's too late. And if you found value in this story, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be silently suffering in relationships built on lies. Remember, healing is possible, and you deserve the truth. Thank you for listening to my journey.